Spoilers are coming! Spoilers are coming! This video is a follow-up to my 4.5-hour Twin Peaks explainer video and contains spoilers for all of Twin Peaks. If you have not seen the explainer yet, I invite you to enjoy that video before watching this one. Otherwise, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. Links are provided. I very much appreciate the positive response to my explanation. I'm glad so many people enjoyed it and found value in it. But I've noticed there are still some doubters out there, which is to be expected, and that's good for you. You think for yourself. But I have some more info for you to consider. I want to take the time to respond to some of the criticisms I've received, as well as clarify some things that were misunderstood in my explanation. In doing so, I'm hoping to provide even more evidence to support the conclusion I have drawn about David Lynch's goal with Twin Peaks.
Let's rock.
By far, the most common criticisms I hear are from people objecting to the idea that there can be one single correct explanation for everything that happens in the show. And there are a few different philosophies for why this should be. There's one line of thinking that goes like this, with no exaggeration: you can't figure out David Lynch, there is no solution to the mystery, stop trying. These are people who have concluded that the key to enjoying a David Lynch work is to cease any attempt to figure things out and just go along with the confusion. Lynch is an artist dealing with concepts so abstract as to be unknowable, and therefore we should not try to know them, but instead, just feel. I can understand where this thinking comes from, as Lynch refuses to explain his work, and ideas within can seem disconnected and contradictory. But David Lynch himself has stated otherwise on numerous occasions. So at times, it does seem as if you were delighting in teasing or mystifying the viewer. No, you never do that to an audience. An idea comes and you make it the way the idea says it wants to be, and you just stay true to that. Clues are beautiful because I believe we are all detectives. We mull things over and we figure things out. We are always working this way. People's minds hold things and form conclusions with indications. I always say the same thing. I think they really know for themselves what it's all about. I think that intuition, the detective in us, puts things together in a way that makes sense for us. It needs to be a certain way, and it's not to confound, it's to feel the mystery. Mystery is good, confusion is bad, and there's a big difference between the two. Not only are we meant to come to conclusions, he insists that these conclusions have been drawn whether we're conscious of them or not. Cinema is a lot like music. It can be very abstract, but people have a yearning to make intellectual sense of it, to put it right into words. And when they can't do that, it feels frustrating. But they can come up with an explanation from within, if they just allow it. If they started talking to their friends, soon they would see things. What something is and what something isn't. And they might agree with their friends, or argue with their friends. But how could they agree or argue if they don't already know? The interesting thing is, they really do know more than they think. And by voicing what they know, it becomes clearer. And when they see something, they could try to clarify that a little more and again go back and forth with a friend. And they would come to some conclusion, and that would be valid. So no, I don't think it's correct to say that David Lynch works are not meant to be understood. I think he'd actually be annoyed to hear people coming to the conclusion that there shouldn't be any conclusions, because his reason for not explaining his art is so that we can figure it out for ourselves. And that's another reason people disagree with the idea of a single explanation for Twin Peaks. David Lynch wants everyone to have a personal interpretation, right? That's absolutely correct. He talks about it all the time.
When things are concrete, very few variations in interpretation. The more abstract a thing gets, the more varied the interpretations. That's the beauty of it. It's just like life. You see the same things, but you come up with many, many different things as you go along as a detective.
If there's 100 people in the audience, you're going to get 100 different interpretations, especially when things get abstract. It's beautiful. Everybody's a detective, and what they come up with is valid in my mind. But for every quote where he says every interpretation is valid, there's another where he says that everything in his work serves an idea. You've already seen several of those in the main video, but here's another where Lynch describes the way he started shooting Inland Empire.
This thing started, I got an idea, and I got an idea for a scene. And I shot that scene. Then I got another idea, and I thought it was a one-off kind of thing, so I shot that thing. And it didn't relate to the first thing at all. Then I got another idea, and it didn't relate to the first two. I thought it was a one-off thing. I shot that. Then I got some ideas that related those. But this happens in writing a script. But here it was already shot, and then more ideas came. And when the more came, I shot in a more traditional way, but always have the script, before we went out and shot anything.
So from this, we can see that no matter how unrelated the ideas may seem in a David Lynch film, there is a single purpose that unites them, and careful planning to make sure that future ideas also serve that purpose. One of the pieces of evidence I used in support of a single explanation is this quote from Lynch on Lynch, where he's talking about Lost Highway. He says that the film is a straight-ahead story and all of the clues are there for a correct interpretation. I suspect people might have said that Lost Highway also had no correct interpretations before this quote was brought to light. Now, people have said, yeah, but this is only one cherry-picked quote taken out of context. It's about Lost Highway, it doesn't apply to Twin Peaks. And I might have agreed with that if not for this clip of the log lady talking about wrong interpretations of clues.
The wrong interpretation of the clues.
Implying that there are correct ones. So it's not just Lost Highway, it's Twin Peaks as well. And it's not me saying that, it's David Lynch speaking through Twin Peaks. So you say Lynch says we're all supposed to come up with our own interpretations. I say Lynch says there's a correct one. Here's the thing. He did say both things, and there's no contradiction. These are not mutually exclusive statements. Both can be true. One unifying idea creates a bunch of abstractions that make up the film. If we know what the original idea was, we can immediately recognize the abstractions as representations of parts of that idea. That's the correct interpretation. But Lynch knows that there's more to these abstractions than just the idea that created them. And then another problem is talking something to death. You start thinking about articulating a certain thing, and then you suddenly see it for what it is, and the magic goes away a little bit. It's tricky. When you talk about things, unless you're a poet, a big thing becomes smaller. Seeing the abstraction for what it really is makes it smaller. It's so limiting to say what something is. It becomes nothing more than that, and I like things that can be more than that. So he hides the original purpose from us and invites us to see what we can see. What makes our interpretations valid is not the interpretations themselves, it's the fact that we came up with them on our own. I think people know what Mulholland Drive is to them, but they don't trust it. They want to have someone else tell them. I love people analyzing it, but they don't need me to help them out. That's the beautiful thing, to figure things out as a detective. Telling them robs them of the joy of thinking it through and feeling it through and coming to a conclusion. The focus is not on your conclusion, the focus is on you coming to your conclusion. If you are told what something means, there's no interpreting to be done at all. You may not agree with what it means, or you may not know the complete reason why it means what it means. When the answers come from you, that's something in the piece that wasn't necessarily intended, or that Lynch perhaps wasn't aware existed, that you already thought to be true. So now there's an additional truth within the piece. The abstraction really means X, but it now also means Y. Multiplied by 100 people, now we have something that originally just meant one thing, but now also means 100 other true things. This is how a small thing becomes a larger thing. A tiny little seed disappears as it grows into the tree of ideas that is Twin Peaks. And for confirmation, we can go back to the log lady clip and see it in its full context.
The clues, although surrounding us, are somehow mistaken for something else. And the something else, the wrong interpretation of the clues, we call our world. Our world is a magical smokescreen.
If each wrong interpretation is still valid, then what she's saying here is that the collective process of misinterpreting the clues into all the different personal truths we see in the show is what makes the world of Twin Peaks. The questioning and interpreting are the magical smokescreen that conceals the original idea, the correct interpretation. And Lynch sees the smokescreen as more interesting than the idea by itself because of what it leads to. This is why the opening of Fire Walk with Me is so important, because it teaches us this lesson. Through Desmond's explanation of his surprise, Lynch is showing us that his weird symbols do have correct interpretations, and there's a method to finding them.
The eye is the local authority. They're hiding something. There's going to be a lot of legwork involved.
The joy should then be in puzzling them through for ourselves. But in showing us that there are answers, he shows us that if we are not the ones figuring them out, the answers aren't very interesting.
Taylor dresses are code for drugs.
Oh.
What used to be a bizarre puzzle is now just a dumb secret code Gordon Cole likes to use for no apparent reason. And yet that is the reason, to show us how big things become small. So ironically, this small thing is actually a bigger thing than anybody realized. The scene concludes by teasing us with a big thing, the blue rose.
But I can't tell you about that.
Desmond refuses to tell us what it is, et voila, we've just unconsciously learned the lesson that the question is more interesting than the correct interpretation. And by the way, the correct interpretation for the blue rose was given to us by Lynch himself through Tammy Preston in season 3.
Blue rose does not occur in nature. It's not a natural thing. The dying woman was not natural.
Oh, it stands for all the conjured up supernatural stuff that Gordon's team likes to investigate. Did you think it meant something else? 100 interpretations wiped out in just 3 sentences by the man who originally posed the question.
Now this is really something interesting to think about.
With all this correct interpretation talk, I can understand how some people thought I was saying that I had the only possible interpretation of Twin Peaks in the intro to my explainer. So allow me to clarify. What I meant was that I'm pretty sure I've discovered the idea that gave birth to all the abstractions. And my warning was the same as Lynch's, that it can be difficult to interpret for yourself once you've heard his ideas and seen them depicted on screen as he described them. The perfect example is the purple ocean where the fireman lives.
This ocean represents an ocean of consciousness.
Once you've seen this clip, you can never not see this as the ocean of consciousness that represents the unified field. Whatever you may have thought this was is now gone. Bob is another great example. Is Bob a demon, or a ghost, or an alien, or a Native American trickster spirit, or an evil interdimensional entity? The answer is yes to any one of these things if you see it as true. But where David Lynch is concerned, there is a correct answer. There are similarities to Blue Velvet in that Twin Peaks is a lumber town and things are happening behind closed doors. But the new element here seems to be that the evil is not of this world. It literally comes from beyond. Here, Chris Rodley has come to his own conclusion that Bob is an entity from some other world beyond our own. As if to correct him, Lynch replies, or it's an abstraction with a human form. That's not a new thing, but it's what Bob was. This is David Lynch, not me, saying that Bob is actually the human representation of an idea. He's meta. If your interpretation was that Bob is a demon, you can go right on thinking that because your interpretation is valid. But how easy is it to go on seeing it your own way now that you've heard Lynch saying Bob is really the human form of an abstract idea? And yet, other interpretations are not invalidated. Bob can be a science fiction style entity that came from another universe, and that story can be used to reflect a greater meta story. And this is a good opportunity to respond to one of the more confusing arguments I've seen, where some people think I'm saying that because the whole thing is a TV metafiction, somehow that means that none of it really happened, or that the plot didn't matter, as if the characters being TV characters that don't know that they're TV characters somehow invalidates the events of their lives. Their argument against that is a quote from David Lynch that reads, "All the characters are real and the place is real." Ha, gotcha, right? Well, first, let's take a look at the context of the quote, and then I'll answer the criticism. In 2013, Lynch was being interviewed by a Frenchman speaking English as a second language who was trying to ask if the fictional town of Twin Peaks was based on a real-world town, and then not understanding Lynch's answer to the question.
Is this city, this village, Twin Peaks, does really exist, or is it a complete creation?
Well, things exist. It's a real place.
But you change some, you
No.
recreate.
All the characters are real and the place is real.
Obviously not. Twin Peaks is not a real town. Dale Cooper is not a real person. So we have to figure out what Lynch means when he says that the place and the characters are real. He's not saying that everything happening in the show is to be taken at face value as is being interpreted. He's responding to a question. Does the town of Twin Peaks really exist? And his immediate response is the key phrase in the exchange. Well, things exist. What he's doing here is making a distinction between fact and truth in art. Twin Peaks is a work of fiction, but it's dealing with situations that people recognize as plausible, concepts and people and places that are true to life. Small towns exist. Kooky characters exist within them. Murder, grief, and fear exist. There are Laura Palmers in the world and Dale Coopers trying to rescue them. There are personal truths within ourselves and our experiences. There are universal truths. And there are stories, both factual and fictional, to reflect all of these real things like a mirror. If we go back to the Bob example, shallow violence for entertainment is a real, true thing that exists. And it is reflected in the mirror of the show, physically, in the form of Bob.
There are things in life that exist, and yet our eyes cannot see them.
But to answer the criticism, no, the metafictive aspects of the show do not invalidate the events of the story. The events of the plot are the fictional facts of the story, and the meta is the truth of it. If you remove all the symbols and supernatural elements, what you're left with is a straight-ahead story. Father abuses and murders daughter, people in the town get caught up in the aftermath, FBI agent comes to investigate. But surrounding that story is the meta. This is the realm of the lodge, and the forces that create the story take the form of the beings that live there. They are the reason the story happens and the source of its truth. Leland Palmer really did kill Laura, but the reason he did it is because he is the character in the story who was meant to do it, possessed by the human form of an abstract idea, so says David Lynch. It just happens that as things go on in the series, the line between fact and truth starts to blur, and after the death of the mystery, it disappears completely as fictional characters begin to physically interact with their own truth. Now, I did say in the explainer that one particular scene wasn't real, the season 3 climax, but what I meant to say was that it's not true and that it doesn't reflect reality. The character Bob really is being defeated in this story. The real reality is that you can't defeat Bob with violence. So the paradox is that in physically defeating the character Bob in our manufactured reality, we are allowing the truth of Bob to win in our own reality. Hence the ending of season 3. I hope I've answered the people who disagree that there can be a single conclusion. I wasn't trying to wipe out anyone's personal interpretations, it's just a natural side effect of pointing out what David Lynch was trying to do. Which leads me to another group of critics, the people who disagree with what I think David Lynch was trying to do. There's a feeling amongst Lynch fans that art being art, his work should not be as easy to understand as I presented in my explainer. It's also been suggested that a few of my explanations are a stretch, which is really just a less aggressive way of saying that I'm forcing my conclusion onto everything, which has the effect of taking ideas that are perceived to be bigger or more important, such as the enormous sphere of complicated emotions and issues that surround incest and filicide, for example, and reducing it all to a considerably less lofty commentary on the shallowness of television. It's just too easy and too simple, right?
How many times have we heard, it's simple? Nothing is simple.
First of all, that was David Lynch's goal, to make you want things to be mysterious and closureless, so that's very well done on your part. I think Lynch would be proud of your sentiment. But I think he's also got you beat with Cousin Lil reducing everything to dumb visual puns. He's literally showing you that there are answers and that you will think they are small. Second, the idea that I'm oversimplifying everything to just a metafiction about TV is an ironic oversimplification of my argument, because what I actually said was that it's a story about Lynch's artistic search for balance in the pursuit of finding beauty in the macabre and therefore the mundane, lamenting the lack of depth in modern media, and attempting to highlight and correct the way the average person consumes it, all in order to promote love and happiness in our everyday lives. The seemingly small concept of Twin Peaks being a self-aware TV show is Lynch's mechanism for delivering this larger, more complicated message. And this includes the show's very serious exploration of very serious topics, because he sees TV as the major culprit in the cheapening of visual storytelling and the spreading of chaos and fear into the zeitgeist. And anyway, it would be ironic for a show that lacked depth to be criticizing the shallowness of TV. Now, I don't blame anyone for thinking that I'm reducing bigger ideas to smaller ones. I understand how it can seem that way. But I think I have a flawless counter-argument. In the video, I explain how Diane represents Twin Peaks, Cooper represents the audience, And Diane's story about Cooper walking into her house uninvited, demanding answers from her, and then forcing himself on her is representative of the audience forcing itself on the show in 1991 in order to get the answer to Laura Palmer's mystery. I've been called out on this numerous times, and I don't think anyone will argue that it's the best exhibit of my perceived reduction of complex and emotionally heavy subjects to mere commentaries on the way we consume TV shows. If we could pick just one example, this would be the one. David Lynch would never be so crass as to equate these two things, would he? Except it is David Lynch equating these two things, not me, and I can prove it. In the acknowledgments section of Lynch on Lynch, Chris Rodley states, "On originally agreeing to participate in the publication, David suggested that we use the simple question and answer format, his stated reason being that the questions would probably be more interesting than the answers. This response was not only typically modest, but also encoded with the fear and trepidation he had always associated with having to talk about his work. This dread had not diminished over the years. Immediately after our last interview had taken place, he called me to say that he was checking himself into a crisis center. I repeat, David Lynch felt so traumatized after answering questions about his work that he checked himself into a crisis center. This is how seriously Lynch takes his art. This is not me reducing important topics like rape to the same level of silliness as spoiling a TV mystery. It's David Lynch himself elevating the concept of being forced to explain his art to the same level of importance as rape. This is not me forcing my personal opinion onto everything. As I have just shown, this is me following David Lynch's words, his ideas, his clues, and his direction to their full extent and logical conclusion. And with that, the last bit of criticism I'd like to address is that I'm overly focused on David Lynch and leaving out the involvement of other people who contributed to Twin Peaks. After all, as David Lynch says,
Mark Frost and I, did that. And Mark Frost is at least 50% of it.
This is why, after my 3-minute spoiler warning, I spent another 3 minutes talking about why I was focused on Lynch rather than Frost. That 3 minutes was originally much longer, but I cut it way down because I didn't want it to seem like I was being overly hard on Frost. Again, I'm not trying to downplay his role in this, but when you get into the research and you start to see the volume of important symbols and concepts that originated from Lynch, the importance of balance, the continuing mystery, Lynch's disdain for 80s TV, the thing in the air, film as a dream, transcendental meditation, and the unified field, Mark Frost may have his own ideas of what things in this show mean, but the majority of symbols and clues have a Lynchian origin and coherence that cannot be denied. And it was Lynch's artistic philosophy informing his direction and visuals that provided the basis for my explanation. And indeed, according to Harley Payton, a writer for the first 2 seasons, it was David Lynch's vision that dictated how things would go whenever he stepped in to direct.
David wasn't there for the first season for that finale. That was something that Mark directed. So that was really, I think, in a lot of ways, Mark's vision for it, if you will. But at the end of the second season, David was very much there. And so you get a different outcome. And he wasn't particularly interested in some of those more linear storytelling points. He had this other vision. At the end of the day, David's vision kind of carried the day in that final episode. I understand, it's just something you accept. I mean, you're either on board or you're not, and I was on board.
In addition to that, Mark Frost wanted to solve Laura's murder and refused to work on the film because it was about Laura and not about what happened after the murder was solved. I don't know if this was because he didn't understand what Lynch was trying to do with the show or because he disagreed that they couldn't have come up with some other way to communicate the message, but in either case, it defeats Lynch's stated and quoted purpose, which was to avoid providing people the closure they needed to move on and forget about Laura.
David made this without Mark. And so for me, it was like that was the sort of essential piece that was missing. I'm not going to psychoanalyze. It felt like it was his attempt to kind of make Twin Peaks his own. And I think the movie suggested that Twin Peaks was better when it was shared between Mark and David.
All of this makes it sound like it was acknowledged even among people involved with the production that David Lynch had his own private intentions with the show. If there was a difference of intention between Lynch and Frost, it could be a result of the way Lynch works with his co-writers. When he talks about writing with Barry Gifford on Lost Highway, he describes it like this. Yeah, on Lost Highway we never talked about meanings or anything. We seemed to be in sync on where we were going, so a lot was left unsaid. We talked, but that can be dangerous. If things get too specific, the dream stops. There are things that happen sometimes that open up a door and let you soar out and feel a bigger thing. So even when writing stuff with a partner, he likes to keep things vague. It sounds to me like even if they had completely different ideas on where they were going with it, if one person's ideas happen to work with the other person's intentions, that's the direction they move. For example, Mark Frost is very interested in Greek and Roman mythology. He spreads it all over the show, and even says that he was putting Agent Cooper through his own personal version of Homer's Odyssey in season 3.
So in thinking about an overall thread for the story, that was it. It was the Odyssey. It was him finding his way home. I always go back to mythology. This is the story of Persephone. It's the story of Orpheus. It's Orpheus. And when you tempt the gods, or when you break the rules, you put yourself in grave moral and physical peril. And I think that, for me, is the best way to explain the final hour of the show.
And all that stuff is interesting and cool and correct. It's all right there to be interpreted. I just imagine David Lynch thinking, yeah, man, that's all great for you. As long as it fits with what I'm trying to do, we can go for it.
My feeling was we needed an origin story for the evil that we have been depicting in this area. And I had mentioned the atomic bomb. And again, it's all metaphorical, but what if something ripped a hole in the space-time continuum and it unleashed it opened Pandora's box. Let's go back to Greek mythology. And things unanticipated and strange came out of the box, just like in the myth.
Yeah, that sounds really good. It actually fits really well with my whole thing about modern fear in the air working its way into broadcast television. And the splitting of atoms can be like a window into the unified field. Not that I'd tell you any of that, but great stuff, Mark. And this goes for any other writers or directors on the show. Any ideas they were exploring are present and interpretation ready. It's real, it's there, enjoy it as you please. But you better be prepared for David Lynch to step in and repurpose those ideas to fit his message. All that being said, I do have reason to believe that Mark Frost was on board with what I propose as David Lynch's TV commentary meta as of the writing of his books, if not much sooner.
There's kind of a concept behind this. This is more of a scrapbook or an archive.
It's a very visual book. It's what you would really call an epistolary novel in that it's comprised largely of documents, found documents.
And the concept here, this is literally a box of these materials that was found that relates to the case we're all familiar with from the television show?
Exactly, and it's a mystery about who exactly put this all together, who was the archivist. There's an FBI agent who is analyzing it, and they're represented in footnotes all the way through it. So it's a mystery in and of itself.
If Frost's books are a reason you're still refusing to accept the idea that David Lynch, the director of Twin Peaks, is appearing in the show as a director that presents metafictive clues about his self-aware TV show that's built out of other TV shows to an FBI agent that represents the audience, you might want to consider that Mark Frost, the author of 2 Twin Peaks books, is appearing in the books as an author that presents metafictive clues about his self-aware books that are built out of other books to an FBI agent that represents the reader. The books follow the same meta as the show.
For more Twin Perfect, press the subscribe button. To support us, use the Patreon link. Consider leaving a like and a comment. It helps the channel ever so much. Thanks.